Chapter 1 The End by Odille. It was early evening. I sat in my car in the empty parking lot of the local library and tightened my grip on the steering wheel. The library was closed on Wednesdays and I was alone. I stared at the brick wall several yards in front of me and revved the engine. I had thought about suicide many times throughout my life, but this was the closest I'd come to actually going through with it. And I was going to do it by driving my car into a brick wall. All I had to do was release the handbrake and put my foot flat to the floor. It would be over before I knew it. I remember that feeling well. Part of what we'll share in this book is why, at the time I was in that emotional state, ending my life by driving into a brick wall seemed like a good idea, and why no logic or reasoning could have made a difference to that decision. What I didn't know back then are three simple but revolutionary facts. 1. Thoughts are connections between neurons, or nerve cells, in the neocortex of the brain, and those connections trigger matching chemicals. Positive thoughts trigger feel-good chemicals, and negative thoughts trigger stress chemicals. 2. Stress chemicals cause blood to drain from the prefrontal cortex of the brain, where we do our cognitive thinking. 3. Implicit childhood memories provide the evidence that proves our self-image and worldview. In turn, our self-image and worldview provide the foundation for our unconscious decisions and actions, and those memories can be changed to the opposite, positive, and empowering. When we're feeling any negative emotion, the stress chemicals that create these emotions cause blood to drain from the prefrontal cortex, where we do our cognitive thinking, to the back of the brain. This is part of our survival system, fight, flight, freeze. When we're faced with an immediate physical threat, the priority is to escape by running away, fighting, or shutting down. These instinctive responses are controlled by the brainstem. Since the time it takes us to think consciously could cost us our life, we automatically switch to using our built-in unconscious survival instinct. This means that whenever we're feeling intense negative emotions, we quite literally can't think straight because we don't have access to that part of the brain. You may have noticed that when you've been emotionally triggered in an encounter with someone, it's only later that you think of all the things you should or could have said. While you were in the middle of the situation and experiencing those intense emotions, your prefrontal cortex was offline. Later, as the level of stress chemicals in your system lowered and blood started to return to that part of your brain, it allowed you to think more clearly. This is one of the main reasons that, from that intense, painful emotional state, killing myself by driving into a brick wall seemed to make sense. The part of my brain that was able to use logic and reason, problem solve, and see consequences was offline. Those stress chemicals had created the same state of emergency they would if I were faced with a bear. When faced with a bear, there's no time to think strategically or negotiate. We must act instinctively and immediately, and that's what the back of the brain enables us to do. Unfortunately, because the unconscious part of the brain has no ability to reason or use logic, it also can't distinguish between immediate physical threat and emotional pain, or between reality and imagination. The same chemicals, creating the same physiological effect, are in play in all those scenarios. Blood drains from the prefrontal cortex whether we're in immediate physical danger, thinking about something we're worried about, or feeling betrayed by a loved one. Not everyone has been suicidal, but everyone has experienced emotional pain. How we navigate those painful experiences, circumstances, and events is determined not by our conscious efforts, but by the implicit memories created through childhood experiences. The memories that provide the brain with references that prove who we are and how the world works. As you notice that it's raining outside, Your brain refers to unconscious memory that provides information on what rain is, whether it's dangerous or not, and any other relevant data. That information is not based on objective facts regarding the rain itself. Rather, it's based on your childhood experiences of rain. For example, you automatically know without thinking about it that if you walk out into the rain, you'll get wet. You probably can't remember the first time you learned about rain through experience, but your brain has the information stored, implicit memory, so that you're able to react automatically. You may also notice that you have an emotional response, which may be different to someone else's. One person may see the rain and immediately feel a desire to walk in it. Someone else may see the rain and feel grateful. Another may see the rain and immediately feel sad or annoyed. What creates the difference between these automatic responses is the references from each person's past that the brain is referring to that determine not only what rain is, but what it means and how to respond to it, and all without our conscious awareness. Implicit memories are based on experience, not on fact. Formed primarily in childhood, they provide the evidence that proves our core beliefs, whether those beliefs are true or not. This is why efforts by the conscious mind to improve self-esteem and confidence, how we relate to others, and even how we manage money aren't always effective. Because no matter how much we may want to change, and no matter what we do to try to change, the unconscious part of the brain is still referring to those references from childhood that prove our current beliefs and behavior patterns. Just like a GPS that's still set for the previous destination, whenever we venture too far from familiar patterns and experiences, no matter how unwanted those experiences may be, the unconscious part of the brain corrects the course. Some may call it self-sabotage, but it's really no more self-sabotage than a GPS is capable of sabotage. In the same way, if your printer prints in red ink and you want the documents in blue, you need to change the ink cartridge from red to blue. The printer is not sabotaging your print job. It just prints the documents using what it has. It's automatic. Regardless of how hard I had previously tried to change my patterns of emotional, physical, and financial struggle, my brain would repeatedly make sure that the course was corrected back to my unbearable normal. Pointless. As I sat in my car that evening, feeling the compulsion to put my foot down and release the handbrake, I had no idea of what was going on in my brain. It would be years before I learned how the brain works, and before I had the tools that we'll be sharing with you in this book. I was drained from the gut-wrenching sobbing, and now I felt quite calm and determined. This was definitely the best for everyone. It wasn't failure in itself. It wasn't my financial problems. It wasn't the fibromyalgia or the IBS. It wasn't that my life had turned out completely differently to what I'd hoped. It was the fact that there was no hope now. Having failed financially yet again, despite working so hard, the realization had come to me that regardless of what I did, what choices I made, how hard I worked, how many times I pulled myself up and tried again, I wasn't meant to succeed. What if this was just the way my story was written? What if I was like a character in a video game who just wanted a quiet, peaceful, happy life, but the player had other plans? That was the only logical explanation for me. No matter what I did or how hard I tried, my life was never going to improve. I was never going to improve, because that wasn't my story. I felt like a little child trying to punch the adult who's effortlessly keeping the child at arm's length with his hand on her forehead. It was pointless. It was just more rounds of getting up and falling down and getting up and falling down, and I didn't want to get up anymore. It was the latest and lowest point in my yo-yo existence of putting my heart and soul into working hard and being knocked down yet again. I revved the engine and was about to release the handbrake when my phone rang. I glanced at it lying on the passenger seat beside me. It was my sister. There was no way I would answer it because I knew she would talk me out of what I planned to do, and I knew there was no point in that. I also knew there was absolutely no point in talking about anything. I was sick of talking about it. I was sick of thinking about it. I felt that even if I tried to talk, nothing would come out of my mouth. There was nothing left to say. There was nothing left in me. There was no point in even trying anything. The call went to voicemail. I looked at the brick wall again. This was definitely the best option. My sister would be better off without me. My mother and brother would be better off without me. And my son would be better off without me. Once I was gone, they would all be able to move on and live happy lives. I would no longer be a financial burden on my sister, and my son would be raised by someone with better financial stability. I thought of my son spending that evening with friends. He had his whole life ahead of him, and he would get the support he would need without me as a weight around his ankles. I love my son more than anything. He has always been the most important thing in the world to me. I would do anything for him. If I didn't know what I know now about the brain, none of it would make sense. From outside of that intensely painful emotional state, my mind would go to the horrific impact my suicide would have on my family, especially my son. But looking back on my state of mind on that day, from where I am now, with my knowledge of how the brain works, it all makes perfect sense. I had spent my life being good, following instructions, following directions, doing as I was told, and yet I was still struggling. I had been the good little girl, but I was still being punished. I thought of myself as far from a victim as you can get. I worked hard, was constantly looking for solutions, and was willing to do what needed to be done, if only I knew what that was. What I didn't realize at the time is that I was in a different type of victim mindset. I was still the child trying to be good so that she would be safe. My perception and worldview was still, if I do the right things, something or someone outside of me will be pleased and I will be rewarded. My work ethic, drive to please, and compulsion to keep trying was based on my implicit childhood memories that proved that this is who I am and how the world works. The references from my childhood provided the unconscious evidence of the following. Life, for me, is a constant struggle that never results in reward, and I come from a long line of people who struggled without reward. I'd been through every self-development and financial improvement method, modality, and belief system I could find. I had done all the things. I'd followed Tony Robbins and thrown myself into massive action. I'd read Rich Dad, Poor Dad and completely changed my beliefs about money. I had worked extra jobs, budgeted, sacrificed, and prayed. I had followed financial business advice to the letter. I'd been positive. I'd done the hours of visualization, imagining in present tense with feeling. I had done the affirmations in present tense with feeling. I had reached out for help on forums. I had done Louise Hay's mirror work, and I had followed Neville Goddard's advice. I had done the energy work and spiritual exploration. I had used self-hypnosis and subliminal messaging and received regular psychotherapy. Every single time, I had fully believed that I'd found the solution, and I committed to it with all my heart. And every time, I would eventually find myself back in the state of struggle. When I did make some extra money, My car would break down, or I would get ill, or someone wouldn't pay me. Something would always happen to get me back into that quagmire. The phone rang again. My sister again. I watched her name on the screen as the phone rang until it went to voicemail. Then a text. I didn't open it. There was no point. Another call. I still didn't answer, but a memory came to my mind of my sister telling me about her own suicidal thoughts and plans. My sister's suicide plan. I clearly remembered her telling me about the agreement she'd made with herself, that when she felt the urge to kill herself, she would agree to do it, but she would do it later. She'd found that the compulsion was so strong that trying not to do it wouldn't make a difference. If anything, her mind would come up with increasingly convincing reasons for following through with it. Instead, she would decide she would go ahead, but that there was no rush. If it really was the best option, then that wouldn't change in the next few hours. Having made the decision, she would watch soccer on TV first, and then, if she still wanted to do it later that day or tomorrow, she would. She had no interest in soccer and didn't really know much about it, but through experience, she had found that for some reason, watching soccer on TV with the sound down was soothing for her. So by the time later or tomorrow came, the overwhelming urge to kill herself had subsided enough for her not to want to go through with it. That memory of my sister sharing her strategy was enough to break through the immediate urgency to end my own life. It was enough to change my emotional state from suicidal to what felt like a deeper sense of surrender. Surrender to nothing. Not even the action of ending my life. Surrender to just sitting. I turned off the engine and just sat, staring at the brick wall. I don't know how long I sat staring, but at some point, the next decision came to me. I would just exist. I wasn't going to try anymore. I would just exist. That was May 21st, 2008. I remember the date because it was the day before my son's 12th birthday. Once I had come out of that emotional pit, I couldn't believe that I was capable of even considering doing that to my child. What a horrific thing to inflict on him at all, but especially the unthinkable timing that would have forever connected that pain to his birthday. I felt like Jekyll and Hyde. I didn't recognize the me that had sat in that car. Although I never again came that close to taking my life, the physical, emotional, and financial struggle continued. And despite my decision that evening to just exist, my relentless optimism and drive to improve kicked in, and I continued to try. I resumed that old pattern of getting excited and enthusiastic about finding a solution, putting my heart and soul into it, and failing, over and over again. I kept searching for solutions, trying everything I came across, from Esther Hicks's law of attraction to borrowing money so that in April 2014 I could sign up with a one-to-one business coach who had an excellent track record of helping entrepreneurs create successful businesses. Despite my diligence in following his advice and working harder than most, I failed again, against all odds. I'd like to say it was a journey and that each step contributed to where I am today, but the truth is, those years were more like wandering around in the wilderness, unable to navigate back to the road. Some of the too many to count paths I explored in my attempts to find my way during those years included applying for different jobs, financial saving strategies, Rhonda Byrne's The Secret, self-help forums, various low-paying jobs, home businesses, EFT, emotional freedom technique, Ho'oponopono, Reiki, flotation tanks, past life regression, crystal healing, various energy healing, learning from Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton, Bob Proctor, and Greg Braden, Abraham Hicks and the Law of Attraction, Mike Dooley's The Universe Talks, What the Bleep Do We Know, integrative psychotherapy, affirmations, visualization, self-hypnosis, subliminal messaging, binaural beats, the Silver Method, Joseph Murphy's The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, various meditation methods, Buddhism, Psych-K, various methods of budgeting, following the advice of a financial advisor, too many books to mention. Despite all these methods, which I'd seen had been so effective for others, there seemed to be something fundamentally wrong with me. I spent almost 8 years trying and failing, on an emotional roller coaster of getting excited that I'd found the solution and then plummeting into the depths of despair again. By June 2015, I was 51 years old, alone, renting a room in a shared house, cleaning other people's houses, and still unable to pay my bills. It was toward the end of 2015 that I finally came across Robert G. Smith's videos on YouTube. Robert had created the methodology Faster EFT, and although I'd tried EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique, in the past, this was different. As I watched Robert's presentation on the effects of negative childhood memories on the adult, I realized that that was the missing piece. Based on what I'd learned about the brain up to that point, it made perfect sense to me. Robert went on to demonstrate how those memories could be changed. I binge-watched his videos, absorbing as much as I could, and then tried his method out for myself. Although Steve and I have developed and added to our own method of changing childhood memories, which we'll take you through step by step in Chapter 5, I first started changing my negative childhood memories using Faster EFT, following Robert's videos and training. At last, I began to see significant changes, both in myself and, as a result, in my circumstances. One morning, about a week after starting to change my negative childhood memories, I woke up thinking differently. I found myself coming up with solutions and options that I realized would probably seem obvious to others, but that I'd never thought of before. More on those later. Within a few months, not only was I able to pay my bills, but I was also traveling internationally and paying for my son and my sister to join me on a trip to Greece on May 21st, 2016. It was my birthday present to my son and an early one for my sister's June birthday. The brick wall from exactly 8 years earlier didn't even enter my mind at that time. And I've only just realized the synchronicity as I'm writing this. 8 years to the day. From the worst thing I could have done to them for their birthdays, to a present that was not only fun, exciting, and full of non-stop laughter together, but that I was able to pay for on my own. By October 2019, I owned 3 of the rental properties I used to clean back in 2015. I had changed my brain's GPS coordinates, my negative implicit childhood memories, from struggle and pain to love, joy, safety, abundance, empowerment, and connection. And the results had been automatic. I started thinking differently, noticed different opportunities, made different decisions, and identified different solutions. My perception, judgment, creativity, communication, and risk assessment had completely changed, all automatically. Steve and I turned those processes into the 3 pillars of the REMIT method. Pillar 1, learning to drive, changing your own brain and body chemistry. Pillar 2, changing the GPS, childhood memory transformation or CMT. Pillar 3, staying on the road, zero tolerance. Everything else I'd tried up until then had only succeeded in cutting off the branches and leaves of the weeds in my life. Now I'd found out how to pull those weeds out by the roots, plant the seeds of the flowers I wanted, and water those flowers until my garden was filled with them. And I'm so excited to be sharing that method and those techniques with you here so that you have the power to do the same for your own life.
Recap. Thoughts are connections between neurons, or nerve cells, in the neocortex of the brain. Those connections trigger matching chemicals that cause sensations that we experience as feelings. Stress chemicals triggered by negative thoughts cause blood to drain from the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which means we lose access to our cognitive thinking ability. Implicit, or unconscious childhood memories provide the evidence that proves our self-image and worldview and, in turn, determine our automatic perceptions, responses, behaviors, and reactions. Those memories can be changed to the opposite, positive, and empowering. The unconscious part of the brain will now refer to the new implicit childhood memories as fact, while we're still able to consciously recall what originally happened, or explicit memory. Changing negative childhood memories to the opposite, positive, and empowering results in automatic changes in our self-image and worldview, which determines new experiences in life moving forward.